to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. This is the place where you get both a coach's and sports dietitian perspective on topics important to endurance sports, including nutrition, training, and how these impact and fit into your daily life both on and off the race course. Your host, Coach Justin, certified run and triathlon coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, a registered dietitian with a specialty in sports nutrition and owner of Fuel to Run. Here at the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast is where your journey begins. Hey everyone, so welcome to episode 3 of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Today's topic, we are going to be talking about strategies for implementing recovery into your training plan. So the reason that we felt like this was important is when I think of recovery as a coach, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're taking days off, so it's more to it than just resting and taking days off. And I would also argue that by the frequent use of taking days off, it actually hinders your progression and growth as an athlete. So what we're going to talk about is not only do we discuss recovery, but how to purposefully implement it into your training plan. Why is recovery so important, and the things that we can do to encourage recovery? So Katie and I were talking just a few minutes ago, kind of like why we wanted to do this podcast, why we wanted to do this episode. And I think it stems from the fact that, we've been endurance athletes. Katie has been doing this, since she was, really, really young. I've been doing this since, for about 10, 12 years. And I think, honestly, I've made more mistakes in recovery than I've done it right. And so, yes, we are coaches, and yes, we've been doing this for a long time. But I think that discussing this topic has not only been for you, but it has been for me as well. Trying to learn new techniques and new methods into recovery and some of the science that lies behind why we need it. And I feel like, it's almost kind of, I don't want to say hypocritical, but this is almost kind of like the pot calling the kettle black kind of episode where, by no means am I an expert on recovery. And I think that just bringing in my years of experience in doing things wrong has made me a better athlete and has allowed me to learn over the years how to do it better. And I think refining the recovery process it takes time, and it's so individualistic, and we have to learn what works for us. My recovery process is going to be very different from Coach Katie's process. What works for her may not work for me. And so what we're going to be talking about in this episode is just some broad generalized topics and things and ideas how to implement these strategies. And then you walk away from this episode with ideas on how to put these into your training plan to see if it works for you. A little bit of mad scientist play, and we're going to figure out what works and what doesn't work. So today's first, I'm going to outline kind of like where we're going so that you have a logical progression of where this episode is taking you. So first, we're going to define what training volume means. And we're then going to step into training stress in terms of, this is what we're looking for. This is where adaptation takes place. And then we're going to talk about how we overlay that on top of life stress and how life stress impacts your ability to recover and perform. We're going to talk a little bit about the fitness fatigue model and how that implements into your strategy, into your training plan, and what it is that you're actually looking for. We're going to talk about what's the difference between overreaching and being overtrained. There is a huge, significant difference between those two topics. And it's something that, while I was researching this, I learned a great deal about this particular model. And, I learned a lot, and it shed a lot of light on some of my past experiences and kind of like being able to evaluate my journey. And so hopefully it'll help you as well. What are some of the signs that you are under recovered, not necessarily overtrained, but just not recovering well? What are some things that you can do to aid recovery and influence it? And then Coach Katie will talk about some of the nutritional aspects of recovery. So we hope that you enjoy this episode and you learn a lot and you'll take away some new things that you can implement in your own journey. So I'm gonna introduce. Hey, Katie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. I know I thinking about this topic. It is a little bit of a selfish topic for me as well, and I think because it's one that I think about a lot or that comes up a lot for me, I figured a lot of other people would get value from this topic as well because, like, you know, Coach Justin said it's hard to get this right, and even just some recent experience for me has caused me to think more about this topic. So, um, just kind of running a marathon and trying to be figure out that tightrope of like overreaching a little bit and then kind of recovering and how to balance that without sort of going off the deep end. And so as we're going through the topics, I can share a little bit more about. I mean, I think both of us will share a little bit more about our own struggles or mistakes we've made. So, I think sometimes that can be valuable in its own, or other people relate to some of the things that we're talking about in our own struggles. But definitely a good topic. So, do we want to kind of? I think maybe Justin and you can talk a little bit about this, but the training. I think we to sort of have the basis of like that discussion of like training volume and what is, how do we define overreaching, or how are we defining some of these things, so people can kind of think about, especially as we're talking about recovery. I think we need to go through some of these concepts. So do you want to talk about training volume and kind of what you're thinking about there, and then we can kind of talk about adaptation and different levels of overreaching or overload?
Absolutely. So first of all, let's define what training volume is. And the way that I view training volume is I, I have my educational background is in economics. So I took a lot of math. So I think of this in terms of just a math equation. And it's a very simple equation. There's no, second derivatives or anything like that. This is a summative equation. So we're talking about duration plus intensity plus frequency. That's training volume. And so whether you put your training plans in terms of miles or in minutes is what you're talking about. That's your duration, right? Then you have the intensity. How do you sequence these workouts together? Are they all kind of like the same intensity? You are all zone two running? Are you doing, one day is threshold intervals, and that's followed by what do you do the next day after you've done that kind of intensity? So that's the second part of the equation, and then the frequency is just how often you're doing it. There's a lot of discussion that goes on. It's like, hey, you shouldn't run back to back days, and I think that that's a valid argument for some athletes, not all athletes. There's nothing that says that you can't run back to back days. There's nothing that says you can't run 6 days a week. So, in terms of managing the frequency, I think the key that goes into that is structuring the workout and the sequence of the workouts so that, you're not doing kind of like two hard efforts back to back or within the same day. If you have, multiple workouts in a day, just structuring it in a way that allows the body to absorb the stress that you're putting on it and do some minimal repairing. You can't expect the body to completely recover within the span of just, we only have 24 hours in a day. One of those hours, could be made up of working out and doing a training session. So you can't expect the body to absorb all of the damage and repair the damage that you've done to it within 23 hours. It's going to be impossible, and it's unrealistic to expect. And so this is why, we kind of throw in purposeful recovery sessions and recovery aids to help speed along that process. And so this is kind of how I talk about this is how I structure training volume. And as a coach, it's my responsibility and it's my job to try and keep my athletes as healthy as possible. Can I keep them, 100% healthy and keep them from getting hurt? I can't. It's unrealistic. Because we are introducing stress, which we'll talk about. The adaptive stress that we're looking for. Any implementation of stress within the equation is going to result in an increase in the probability or the risk of injury. Right? That's just a given. This is why we do this, and you can't completely wipe away that risk. But um, one of the things that I do with my athletes, and I know that I differ from Katie in this, and that Katie's training plan is in miles. And she's been doing this for years, and it's something that she's used to. It's something that works for her, and I don't. I mean, I leave this up to Katie to respond, but I don't know how Katie would manage a training plan if it's done in minutes. Would you
Yeah,
feel comfortable doing something like that?
I mean, I have before when I worked with a coach who did minutes, but I've always reverted to mileage, and so it would be hard for me because I kind of feel like I'd want to know, well, how many miles is that? How many miles am I running, this week or something? And so it's still kind of probably
Sure.
be thinking about that, but yeah, I kind of because of the way it's my planning training plans are kind of structured. I It's mileage, but I'm also thinking in, what percentage of that mileage is easy zone 2 versus hard training sessions and trying to balance that in certain ways. So I kind of know the intensity piece too. It's one thing if I think either way, whether you're doing minutes or you're doing mileage, you have to kind of think about that balance, whether it's in minutes or, because I'm actually looking at minutes as well, I guess, in some ways, and measuring like how many minutes am I in zone 2, how many minutes am I in these other zones, just using kind of heart rate technology. And I am looking at that actually in minutes because then I calculate that into percentages. So in a way, I kind of do both, but I just like when I'm thinking of a goal for the week, I like to think in I'm going to try to hit this mileage, but that additional mileage may come from more zone 2, not necessarily intensity. So those are things I'm also taking into account. So it's a little more complex than just mileage, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and I think that the justification that I use for why I do it in minutes is because it allows me to manage training stress. In my opinion, it allows me to manage training stress better and
Mhm.
easier. If I live in Virginia, and so the 6 mile run that I have an athlete do or that I do in July is going to be very different than the exact same course, the exact same time of day, the exact same conditions, physical conditions, than it would be in October. And how that stresses the body differently. So, in October, that same athlete, if I give them an hour run, might be able to get in a nice solid, 7 mile run, and the stress is X on the body. But the exact same route for that exact same athlete, fueled the same way in July, they may be able to only get 5 miles in, because of the environment in which they're running in. And so that's something that you have to take into consideration is how is the body able to absorb that stress, and forcing that same athlete to run 7 miles in July may keep them out there an additional 30 20 to 30 minutes. And if it's only an hour run, you're talking about a 50% increase in the duration of the workout in July versus the same run in October. And
Mhm.
so that's why I tend to use minutes. It allows me to kind of protect the athlete a little bit better. And something that I highly recommend for new runners and new athletes that are going out, and rather than trying to hit a particular mileage all the time, maybe take a look at, doing your training plan in minutes. As you start to build a more solid aerobic base and conditioning increases, then you might be able to consider, okay, now I want to set some mileage goals. I kind of know I have a ballpark idea on what I can get done in an average 60 minutes, and that might be able to allow you to set a goal in terms of like run volume and miles. But that's something that I highly recommend for new runners is to
Yeah, I
to get
agree.
away from these training plans that are in miles, which there are tons of them on the internet, and that's where they tend to get them from. And I think it's just a bad approach for new runners.
For new runners, for sure. I mean, you have to remember I've been running for a while and I have made quite a few mistakes, but now I feel like I'm finally kind of figuring it out more. I'm better now at adjusting for those variables because I'm monitoring things, and I might cut my run short even though I was supposed to get a certain mileage on certain days because I get out there and I'm like, man, it's hot out. I'm not going to keep pushing myself, or I'll go in and finish on the treadmill or something like that. So it's not, it's just kind of knowing when to push and when to hold back a little bit. And that, I think, for new runners isn't, so easy. So I agree. I think for new people, like that minutes, and they can always look like, how many miles did I run this week? Within those minute time frames, and that's interesting. But not to maybe take the mileage too much as gospel. I mean, one thing I do is I do some cross training in addition, and I take that in minutes, and then I kind of say, this is probably close to this much equivalent in mileage, just to kind of give myself an idea of where I would be at if I were to be doing that in running form. But it's just the way I think. I think for me, it's like that type A. Like, I've got to think in mileage, but I'm always kind of trying to balance that and make sure that, okay, I was supposed to hit this mileage, but this week's just not going to happen. I have to take an easy day. When I'm not feeling good, I have to take this easy day. That's going to bump my mileage down a little bit, but that's okay. So sometimes I think what happens is people get so set on, even with minutes or whatever they're supposed to do, they get so locked in that this is what I have to do, that they're not able to make adjustments sometimes to then that kind of compromises their performance a little bit. And that's kind of where this ties in with that recovery piece. Is it is hard to get it right. Sometimes we do want to be overreaching a little bit, and maybe that we do want to be a little fatigued, and that's okay. And sometimes we want to pull it back a little bit, but yeah, absolutely.
I think this feeds in. I mean, I don't want this podcast episode to be talking about, how do we structure the
Mhm.
proper training plan. We can save that for another episode because that can be a whole series in itself. I mean, there's a science to it, and then there's an art to it, that
Mhm.
comes from experience and just learning. And no one athlete is the same. So let's talk a little bit about, in terms of, well, why is recovery needed? And the recovery is needed because what we're doing is we're introducing stress to the body. And so there are 4 levels of what I would call phases of training adaptation. And I was listening as I was doing research for this episode. I wanted to get a little bit more sciency, but I don't want to bring too much science to this because I don't think that that's appropriate for the audience that we want to target. If you want a more sciency kind of background to it, I'm happy to share the podcasts and journal pieces that I've researched for that, and we can share that in the notes for the episode. But I want to kind of boil this down a little bit. And so the first stage of what we'll call training stress that leads to adaptation is what's called acute overload. Okay. And so what this is this is where you do a workout and, a training session, and, you know, you're within your fitness range, right? You haven't really pushed it too far outside of your your current limits, right? It may take you minutes to recover from a particular effort to maybe just a day or two. You go out and you do, a nice zone 2 run. You might be a little bit sore that evening, but the next morning you're fine. That's what I would call is like acute overload, right? I almost kind of consider this to be more of a maintenance approach to training. So, there are phases of the annual training plan where, we've got, a base build, we've got a peak, and then we've got some deconditioning, and then we kind of go into maintenance. Acute overload is where I would kind of build this this maintenance period, right? Trying to hold on to the fitness that I've got. I'm not trying to stress the body out too much. I'm just trying to hold on to what I've already built, right? One thing that you'll walk away from with this is that you may not see significant improvements in performance at this level. And I think that this is where a lot of athletes get stuck. You know, you don't really find the need to recover because you're not introducing enough stress to the body to bring about adaptation. So you're like, oh, I've been able to train all these years and I've never, really needed to take a day off. I don't need Normatec boots. I don't need rolling. I don't need PT or massage. Well, I would argue that if that is truly the case and you've been able to absorb your training stress like that, then I would argue maybe you haven't been training hard enough and that you've kind of hindered your own progress. And so after this phase of acute overload is where we start to get into functional overreaching, right? So this can take anywhere from several days to a week to recover from the training stress. This is where I would consider the art of the taper to be relevant. And if you go to tabularasaracing.com, I have a blog post out there. It's called The Art of the Taper. And it discusses, how to approach some ideas on how to approach your taper. But that is the whole purpose behind it. And it's to shed the fatigue that you've accumulated, over the training process, whether you've spent weeks or months training for a particular event, you've introduced so much stress on the body that you have not been able to shed that stress and absorb the fitness within 24 hours of a session. So what happens is that you dig a little bit of a hole on Monday, you go in, and the point is that you want to train consistently, right? So you're not going to stop and take Tuesday off because you dug a little bit of a hole. You're going to go in on Tuesday and you're going to do some more training. Maybe you dig a little bit of a deeper hole, right? And then the next day it's like, oh, I'm feeling kind of worn down. Maybe I'm not going to dig as deep of a hole. So you do a little bit less intensity and it kind of fills the hole in a little bit, right? So it brings you back up. But over time, the trend is what I would call a downward negative relationship, right? You're digging deeper and deeper and deeper until you get to that point where you need to like take a week, depending on how consistent you are, and depending on the duration of the race that you're training for, it can be anywhere from a week to 3 weeks. For a typical Ironman event, most training sessions are going to call for a 3-week taper. It doesn't mean you stop doing stuff and you just do nothing and lay around and Netflix and chill for 3 weeks, but you are kind of decreasing volume. And the reason that we do that is so that it allows the body to absorb and repair itself so that you peak on race day. Now, this is where some interesting situations take place. And this is where I will own and be vulnerable here. This is where level 3 is where I've probably spent a lot of my, I would call fitness career, my journey making mistakes. And that's where we go from functional overreaching, where you're still seeing increases in performance, but you're accumulating stress. The next level is what we'll call non-functional overreaching. You've reached the point now where you've dug this hole, but your performance and the gains that you're making are either none, where you've made no performance gains, or you've actually regressed in your performance. And, I think many athletes out there, as you progress through a training plan and you see, man, my times are getting slower. What's going on? You know, uh, Last week I ran my long run at, a 10-minute pace. This week I ran it at a 10-15 pace. Same miles, same temperature, same conditions, same fueling strategy. I must be not gaining fitness. Why am I getting slower? You can make the argument that you might have reached this level of your training plan where you've now broken into this next level. It's like non-functional overtraining. All right. This is where, in my personal opinion, is where you find the biggest risk for overuse injuries. And the reason that I stress strength conditioning to my athletes and to myself so much is because I've spent a lot of time in level 3 where non-functional overreaching. And I would make the argument, I don't have any science behind this, but I would say that the cardiovascular system becomes so much stronger than the muscular system that it becomes weak and it can't absorb the demands that you're putting on it aerobically. So you just run and run and run, but the strength of the attachments to the bones and the ligaments and tendons and the muscles can't absorb it. And so, even though aerobically you can run more, structurally you can't. And this is where, I find the biggest risk is in this non-functional overreach. Level 4 is the place where, you know, for non-functional overtraining, it could take, we're talking like maybe several weeks to get past. Your motivation tends to be down a little bit. Uh, you know, your appetite may be off. You have mood swings and stuff like that. Um, so this is kind of the symptoms that you've now broken into this non-functional overreach. So these are some qualitative measures that you can look at versus quantitative measures, in terms of like your performance and metrics and numbers. And you can look at heart rate, HRV, and all these other kind of metrics to evaluate where you are. Level 4 is the overtraining. I've had, in my past, I've been kind of a workhorse. I love heavy volume, and I've been known. Any of my friends that are out there probably watching this or listening to this, or once my wife listens to it, she will tell you that this guy overtrains. You know, he just does way too much. And I can see Katie smiling a little bit there. She I think she knows a little bit. She's seen my training plan, but that's fine. I think seeing what it means to be overtrained is a rarity. I don't think I've ever broken into the being overtrained. So there's a difference between being overtrained, which is an adjective, versus overtraining, which is a verb. I think it's more common to be overtraining than it is to be overtrained. And the reason is because once you've kind of broken into that, it can take months to get back to baseline. You're talking, you have zero desire to train. You may not even be physically able to train if you get to this point. And I think, hormone levels are thrown off whack. Your motivation is way down. Your sleep may be, volatile. There's a lot of symptoms that can take place with this, and it just takes you months to kind of dig out of it. Personally, I've never been to the point where, I've said I need to take like 2 months off.
Do you mind if I share my experience?
Absolutely, please. Let's go. Let's listen.
We all, like I mentioned in the very beginning, I've been running since 12, and so just let me preface this by, in college, it was kind of one of these atmospheres, and I think a lot of college runners can maybe relate to this. It's like, even if the coach wasn't explicitly saying run hard every day, there was a sort of mentality, especially at the Division I level, like run hard every day. So even on the days we were sort of set to run easy, we hardly ever did. So I have this mentality from college. Well, I did until recently. I've been much better about this, like over the last 10 to 12 years after this experience. But I decided back about 12, 13 years ago, I was going to do the California International Marathon. And I was in graduate school for nutrition at the time. So you think I would have known a little better, but I wanted to train like an elite. So I was trying to hit like 80 miles a week, but I wasn't doing the necessary recovery in between. I was kind of just training at high intensity a lot of the days. So rather than paying attention to other variables like heart rate and how I was feeling, I was just kind of pushing through. Like, we train hard. That's what we do. I train hard. I want to be like an elite. I wanted to get the specific time at this marathon, and I likely was overdoing it. I mean, you can imagine even being a master's degree, I mean, there's stress on top of that as well. I can remember one distinct workout where I was doing 800-meter repeats, and I I didn't feel good. I mean, in retrospect, like I should have just not done the workout. Like today's just not going to be my day. But being that type A and having that like go hard, or go home mentality, I did it and I pushed through. And it was like after that last repeat, I could barely crawl home. I was trying to jog like a warm down, but it was like more of like a crawl. Like, I mean, it was like everything I could just to maintain any sort of resemblance of a run on my way home. It wasn't good. And it was like, okay, well, I just need to recover from this. And this is right before I sort of went into my taper period of like 2 or 3 weeks before the marathon. Like, okay, I just pushed it over the edge. I'm gonna be fine. And it subsequently days and days passed and I did not feel better, and sometimes you don't always before a marathon, but this was, I knew something wasn't going great. Like I had this intuition, like there's something happening here. And I did that marathon. It was the most painful experience I've ever had in a race. It was some of it was walking towards the end. My body just get like literally gave up on me almost. Like it's a surprise I finished. I did have to walk, and it was my slowest marathon I've ever had. And it took me, I could barely walk the next day. I mean, this is one I've trained for. So typically, then this can happen. But when somebody's well trained, they shouldn't do a race and then be unable to completely walk the next day. So that was one sign that something wasn't right. And I took like a month off or so and then came back to it, tried to run because I was like intuitively like, I need some time off. Well, on an easy run, my heart rate was like 180, high. I mean, that's high. That's close to my max. And so I had a bunch of lab testing, and that's when I found out I had Hashimoto's. So my speculation is I just pushed my body over the edge. And truly, it took me months to actually get back to any training that I'm just lucky it didn't last forever because you hear about people who sort of have this or become overtrained or get into that phase and never return. And I'm lucky that I was able to sort of figure this out and recover from it. But that I do think, I mean, was I ever diagnosed as overtrained? No. But if anything, I sure came close to something resembling that. And that was awful. It's an awful experience. So, now moving forward, I'm definitely have learned a lot from that experience. And I think now working with people and working with athletes in nutrition and talking with them about recovery, this is something I emphasize is you don't want to be there. You don't want this to happen to you. Let's do what we can to recover. And I've learned from that mistake a lot. But it sucks I had to go through through that experience to learn it. And now I know it's not go hard or go home. Sometimes you have to just go home. So, yeah.
It brings the conclusion that I've come to over the years of doing this. And I mean, I can honestly say if I look back over the decade or so that I've been doing this, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change how I approached my training. I would still make the same mistakes that I did then. Um, and I think because I made those mistakes, it has made me a better coach. It's made me more experienced. It's made me wiser, where I can now pick up on the signals of what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling in my own body, and being able to reconcile like, what is it that I'm feeling? What is it that I'm seeing? And being able to reach those conclusions. And it makes me able to pick up on the cues that I get from athletes, as well. Because there's more than just, if I log into Training Peaks and I'm just seeing kind of like what an athlete is doing, that's the minimum of what I want. I could care less about like what mile paces are. I rarely look at mile paces for my athlete workouts. I may look at some of the intervals that I have them do and kind of like where they were in those intervals. Do I care what their overall pace was? Absolutely not. What I do care about is the qualitative comments that I get from the athlete in terms of like the comments that they write. This run felt great. I was able to go out with friends, in the evening, even though I did a hard workout earlier in the day, or I came home, but I wasn't hungry, which tells me that they fueled properly for their workout. it's stuff like that that really kind of makes the difference, right? And that's where we get our insight. I don't think I would have the same insight today if I had done things right then. And so I think that your experience of what it meant to be overtrained, but I don't believe that there's like a clinical diagnosis of being overtrained. There's no blood markers that we can run or panels that we can run and say, yes, you are overtrained. So I think it's more of like a qualitative thing. It's like, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm able to do. So I think that your experience during that time has made you a better athlete for yourself and for the people that you work with.
Yeah, I would
So
agree. I think it's I would I regret it a little bit. I wish I had known better, but there's no going back. And yeah, I think it does make me more aware now. I mean, now training, I think now that I'm in my early 40s, gives my age away a little bit. I'm training smarter than I ever have before. It was all of those years of accumulated knowledge and doing things wrong and sometimes getting it right that kind of brought me to this place. So yes, it was painful, but I did. I think I learned a lot from it. So yeah,
I think, and one of the reasons that I'm bringing this up now is because I think what happens is that athletes want to try and play it safe so much to where they're so apprehensive and so anxious ridden and nervous about making a mistake, and pushing it, and pushing it between that level two of functional overreaching and non-functional overreaching. They're just like, oh, I don't want to be there. I think that there's value in getting there because it gives you the experience to know when you've crossed that threshold. So now you've kind of bumped up against the boundary that you have, and now you know where that boundary is.
right.
And so
Well,
now you just
also,
kind of you
yeah,
roll back a little bit and then you push it a little bit more. See if you can push that boundary out a little bit further until, well, there's the new boundary. It's a little bit further out, so I'm gaining fitness. And then you just kind of roll it back a little bit. There's this it's a game. It really is. So it's like, you blindfold yourself and you tell them to walk down the road, and they're just like, okay, what I want to do is I want to find where the guardrails are on this road so I know how far left or right I can go. That's what you want. You don't want to say, I want to force myself to walk down the center line so that I don't risk, hitting the guardrail. My argument is hit the guardrail as much as you possibly can because that's where the adaptation takes place and that's where the growth happens.
yeah, and I do want to mention with that experience I had, it was this is month. This is not something that happened in a week. It was me pushing the boundaries for far too long and not allowing my body to recover. So it's very unlikely, very, very rare actually that people end up in overtraining syndrome or you might overtrain. You most of the time there are things that are happening, whether it's an injury or the fatigue just builds to a point where you absolutely have to take time off. For me, it was like I was pushing through. I didn't have an injury, but I was pushing through some signals that I should have taken a recovery. And that's very rare that people will be able to push. Not to say that I'm somehow a freak. I just have that type A mentality. And so it wasn't as though that 800-meter you do one hard workout. This was after accumulation of hard training day after day, month, at least a couple months worth. So just keeping that in mind too. I don't want anyone to be like, oh, now I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to like not ever push myself a little too hard. It is absolutely necessary to push yourself. It's just how do you get that balance of like pushing a little overreaching and then allowing a little recovery so you can have those adaptations. It's all about adapting to be better. And it is a bit of a game of like, how do you do that? How do you push it a little bit and then pull back and push it a little bit and pull back so you can continue to get better without pushing a little too far? And if you're listening correctly, you can self-correct a little bit when you are pushing too far to allow a little bit of recovery so you don't go into that overtraining. But it's not about just keeping it like I'm going to recover just as much as I'm going to train and recover and have that balance be perfect all the time, because you won't necessarily make the adaptations you need without a little bit of pushing the boundary. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. But let's like, do you want to talk a little bit more about, I know you kind of mentioned like muscle soreness and fatigue. I know we want to talk about stress, and I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about
Yeah.
the
Uh,
recovery piece too. So what?
right. So one of the clear signals of the need for recovery is the onset of muscle soreness. Right. So this is where your body is signaling to you that there is some kind of adaptive process that is going on. And so a lot of people make the assumption that muscle soreness is the result of micro tears within the muscle. While that is true to a certain extent, it is not necessarily the complete reason why you have muscle soreness. The reason that you would conclude this is that if all soreness was the result of micro tears, there would be no such thing as delayed onset muscle soreness, right? So let's say that you go and you do a hard workout in the gym, in the weight room, right? You're in the off season, you're going to do like a nice solid strength session. What you find is like the next day you're not very sore, you're a little sore, but the day after is where the soreness really sinks in. That's what delayed onset muscle soreness is. So if it was all micro tears, then the soreness would take place instantaneously, right? Your peak soreness would be closer to the event rather than pushed out further. And while yes, muscle tears do happen, and that's what we want because that's how the muscles grow back bigger and stronger. The muscle soreness is an inflammatory response, right? So it's the body's reaction to stress. And so what happens is the body is, there is some kind of stress or damage to the muscle. So the body pulls in fluid and everything else to try and repair that damage. So then you get a little bit of swelling and things like that. And so it's this inflammatory response is what the soreness takes place. And some of the keys and ideas that we're going to present in this is how to manage that inflammatory response. I have been known, and I'll own this a little bit, to try and manage the inflammatory response chemically. That means that I am a firm believer in anti inflammatory meds. I've made the mistake on taking them way too long and resulted in some liver issues. But, you know, that I was hard-headed because I liked how I was feeling. I wasn't feeling that inflammatory response, so I could train exactly the way that I wanted to, and it was like I was Superman. There was no effects to the training. I felt just as good the day after as I did the day of, and I could keep pushing. So I've since learned this valuable lesson that the inflammatory response that our body provides us gives us good information, and we should listen to what this information is and what it's trying to tell us.
Yeah, I would just say
Uh,
like that too is that inflammatory response post exercise. I think just a reminder that that is part of the adaptive response. So there is an acute inflammatory response that happens after we do hard training. That is normal, and that's part of the adaptive response. And over the course of the day, it declines. So it's this acute inflammation. More chronic inflammation is a different thing. That's a more of a problematic thing. But there's an acute response that is an adaptive piece. So if we're doing anti-inflammatories immediately after, like that can actually blunt our adaptive response. And that's why some of these recovery modalities that we might talk about here in a little bit, we just want to keep that in mind because there's times they should be used and times maybe they shouldn't. And it's okay to sometimes use anti-inflammatories, but it sometimes, yeah, our body, when we're in pain or sore, sometimes that's our body telling us it needs a recovery day, or we need to take it light, or we have something actually like an injury going on. So we do want to be, aware of that. So I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to take some turmeric. I'm going to I'm going to do this like vitamin C or vitamin E, like right after I'm take some anti-inflammatories, antioxidants right after my run. It's probably not the best time, or, maybe ice bath right after, maybe okay certain times and not others. So it's just a good thing to remember is that that is a natural response and it's helping us adapt. Um,
Yeah.
do we want to
But
talk? Oh, go ahead.
the pain that comes from soreness is actually from it. The pain is a perceptive thing. So my pain levels are very different than what your pain levels would be, and so it's this fluid that gets pulled into the muscle, and the muscle swells, and that pushes up against the nerve sectors, and that's what causes pain, right? And so my ability to push past that pain is going to be different than somebody else's ability to do that. And
Yeah.
so, when it comes to soreness, yes, there's a little bit of science behind it, but every person's abilities to manage soreness and the pain that comes from it is very different. And so it's a hard lesson that I've had to learn as a coach, where it's just like, "God, you're just sore." So it's like it's okay, just push through it. But then I've had to kind of come to the realization, it's like, okay, well, my perception of pain and soreness is very different from somebody else's. And so just because I would push through it doesn't necessarily mean that I have the expectation that somebody else
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we all yeah, that's the thing, it's hard, it's even as a coach to know, like, "Oh, you're in pain," like, I I think I have a high pain tolerance, so maybe I can push through more, and that's maybe why I overtrained a little bit because it was like I was maybe sore and I just didn't perceive it like somebody else would, and I think that's important. So let's talk about, let's kind of dive in because I do want to make sure we get into some of the recovery strategies and the importance of what to do with recovery. I think one thing I definitely want to make sure we also talk about is that when it comes to this, we were talking a lot about training and training volume, but it's not just the training that we do, it's other stressors that accumulate, fatigue and can cause issues. So when we're thinking about how hard we can train and what we can recover from or that balance, we also have to take into account like other factors like life stressors, right? Somebody with two kids and a full-time job isn't going to have is going to have a different sort of life stressors than someone without kids who maybe has a part-time job and is able to have more time to train. These or an elite athlete where all that they're doing, that's their life, their training. Their ability to do 120 miles a week is because that's all they're doing versus somebody who has other things cannot do that much, and to expect that you're going to do that volume as someone who maybe has a full-time job is not a good expectation because it is these other stressors that cause additional fatigue and stress our system. So I think we do want to mention there, I don't know if you have anything to kind of add to that piece, Justin, but it
Yeah,
isn't just,
I completely agree with you, and it's one of the things that I've actually had conversations with athletes as well. They'll do a workout, and then all of a sudden they'll say, I just don't know, I just didn't have it today. I was just, my performance was down, my pace wasn't on target, so it's like I don't know what's going on. And so the very first question that I ask is, what's going on in your life outside of training? What's work like? Do you have a big project that's going on right now? Do you have deadlines that are looming? Do you have kids? Are those kids super busy? Do you have basketball tournaments and baseball tournaments going on that you're going here and there, and you're playing Uber to all these different people? So, you know, that is the very first question that I ask, and most of the time they say, "Oh yeah, that's right. Work has been a little hectic lately. I've had to work late a few nights, so I've got my bosses on me a little bit about this project." And so it's the differentiation between the body doesn't differentiate between training stress and life stress. It doesn't care that you've gone out and you've run 6 miles versus I've had a really hard, mentally draining day writing code. For a project that I'm working on, your body doesn't care. Your body only knows that it's under stress, and it will manifest in all areas of your life. It can manifest in terms of like your appetite, what you're choosing to eat, what you're craving to eat, how you perform in your workouts, the quality and quantity of your sleep. Stress manifests it in all aspects. So it would be unrealistic to think that you can totally disregard life stress and the demands that you have on your life in terms of your athletic performance.
Hmm. Yeah, I think most people maybe intuitively know that, but I do run into people, and this is maybe was part of my mistake years ago when I was overtraining, was try, not taking into account that maybe I had some stress from writing my master's thesis and other things going on in my life that were also stressful. And I think this is it's easy sometimes for us, or we know, or not easy, but it's common to kind of look at Instagram or TikTok and see, oh, this elite athletes doing these workouts and they're just spending all this time doing this additional training stuff like support training and all this other stuff, and think I've got to do that, but they don't have the same stressors. So try not to even compare yourselves to others who are out there training, and realizing like you do need to account for those stressors. I also want to mention something before we kind of talk about maybe some signs that we're not recovering. But another big stressor on the body is glycogen depletion. So we'll talk about this when we talk more about recovery. But if you're not fueling correctly, even if your training volume's adequate and you're depleting those glycogen stores, that can actually be a form of stress. So I see that a lot with people who are maybe trying to lose weight, or they're not intentionally doing this, but they're just not eating correctly. And they're like, well, I should be able to manage this training volume. What's going on? If you're not getting the right amount of carbs and you're chronically glycogen depleted, that's also a huge form of stress on the body. So something else to consider isn't just the stressors, like the sleep, obviously we'll talk about, is a huge one, but like all these other components are potentially going to contribute. So just wanting to mention that, and that kind of maybe helps us lead into our further discussion. But let's just talk really quick about just a few signs that someone might be under recovered. I think we talked about muscle soreness, but some that might be a little bit surprising here, I will mention, and then I'll let you kind of talk, Justin, would be like the loss of appetite. I just want to mention that one because I think you mentioned like sometimes, oh, if someone comes back from a run, they might not be hungry. That may indicate that they ate enough. It may also indicate sometimes I don't have an appetite after a long run because of the heat or something's going on. That doesn't mean I don't eat. I still need to try to eat something after my long run or after my run. So loss of appetite can sometimes actually mean something negative, especially if it's in the context of you start to lose your appetite and it's like 2 or 3 days and you're just not that hungry. You're not really able to eat. You're like training still a lot and you need more, but your appetite is declining. That's a big red flag. It's okay if it happens in one instance, but if it's like 2, 3 days and you're starting to really be like, well, I'm not hungry, that is a sign that you are probably overdoing it a little bit. And what are some others that you think of, Justin?
I think some of the ones that I look for, either in myself or in my other athletes, is a ranking of soreness. How sore are you? And we know the reasons for soreness. We've already talked about it and covered it at length. So the question is like, okay, does the soreness subside as you start to move? You know, I know that when I wake up in the morning, it is excruciating, and I'm in my upper 40s, and I've done a lot of dumb stuff to my body. So I know that those first few steps are going to be challenging. The question becomes is what are those steps like an hour after I've been up and kind of moving around? Does the soreness subside? Okay. But if it doesn't, then that's a clear indication that you might are starting to dig a little bit of a deeper hole where the soreness doesn't start to subside as the muscles kind of loosen up. The next one is a prod is it's actually something, it's a piece of technology that I've started using, and Katie turned this on to me, but we have no connection with this company whatsoever. And I'm still kind of like learning it, and I'm not adjusting my training plan based on the information that it's giving me. And it's the use of the Morpheus system. It's a HRV monitoring system where I'm tracking my HRV in the morning, my resting heart rate, and my recovery score. Those are the only three pieces of information that I use, and I log it in Training Peaks. But all I'm interested in is the trend. I could care less what my HRV is today versus what it was yesterday, and what it's going to be tomorrow. My question is, has it been over the past, 7 days, 7 to 8 days? It's the trend that I'm interested in. And if you're looking for for quantitative measures, things like HRV, resting heart rate, those are the and recovery scores. All your wearable devices provide some type of metric. I caution you in terms of understanding how these devices are calculating these, and whether you make adjustments to your plan based on the information that it's giving you is completely up to you. I know that I don't adjust my plan, but if I find that the trend is going in the direction that I don't want it to go, and it's been doing that over like 5 to 7 days, then I start to pay attention.
Mhm.
I'm not going to just like willy nilly just say, "Oh, my HRV is not optimal today, so I'm going to take a recovery day." I don't do that, um, but it's something to keep just
Yeah, I mean, I use
in mind.
HRV as well, the same way, kind of just more. I look at the recovery score and I kind of base a little bit of my zone two training based off what it's kind of giving me, actually, because it does seem to align pretty well. So it changes the way that the app works. It actually changes your heart rate zones based off how well it determines your recovery. A lot of times I use that sometimes when I have a hard workout and it's telling me I haven't recovered as well. And I know I've got some recovery days coming up and I need to just push through. This kind of happened to me last week. I just went ahead and did my workout. Felt fine. I was a little sore, but I felt fine during the workout. And then I had like 2 days of really easy training. So sometimes you just have to take it with a grain of salt and maybe just listen to your body a little bit because it's not always going to get it right. And sometimes you just have to do something. But I think it can be the trends over time. Like Justin said, if it's just trending down or you're just having days of poor recovery or lower HRV several days in a row, that might be a sign. So
Yeah.
I also think of, oh, go ahead.
I would just encourage the listeners to go and read up on what HRV is, and
Mm-hmm.
like what, because that during the research for this episode, I kind of got a clear understanding. Okay, so this is what HRV is, and it seems intuitive now on what this number is telling me, and what good directions are and what bad directions are. So, I'm not going to go into this podcast, this episode on, how what HRV is, but if you are interested, I would recommend, going out and doing a little bit more research. If it's one piece of the endurance puzzle is what I'm kind of getting at. So, we're trying to put together, a 1,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, and stuff like HRV, resting heart rate. These are only individual pieces of the overall puzzle. And so some pieces are bigger than others. And so I would just encourage you to be more concerned about putting more pieces into the puzzle than focusing on individual pieces,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And I
One of
think,
the Yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
go ahead. I think let's like, we'll talk about a few, I mean, I think just a few more things on this symptoms. And then I think I'd be good to just dive into the recovery piece because
Yeah, I think
we have a little
there's
bit of
just
other
like a
pieces.
couple of them on this list that I kind of wanted to mention,
Okay.
because they're easy to see. We've already talked about decreases in performance. We've covered that at nauseum already. Um, Susceptibility to becoming sick. If you start to feel colds coming on, sometimes that's the weakening of the immune system as the inflammatory response builds in the body. Um, I know that it's very rare for me to get sick. So I know when I do get sick, something is really, really wrong. So that's not really a big piece that I focus on because it happens rarely. But mood imbalances, is one thing, a quickness of temper or something like that, where, those start to manifest, that you're getting a little worn down. If your significant other comes to you and say, "Why are you being so snippy lately?" It could be an indication that, maybe you're pushing it a little bit and maybe you need some better quality sleep. And where the other one is insomnia, difficulty sleeping. I could also argue that vast amounts of sleeping, oversleeping, to feel the need to like sleep all the time, could be an indication that something is imbalanced. I know that there are other reasons on why you can have, excessive sleepiness, but it could be. that, if your training volume is high and you have other pieces of the puzzle that are pointing to this, that's one indication that, hey, maybe my sleep is being affected by it. So it's just something to pay attention to.
Mhm. Yeah, I think those are just, yeah, all of these are kind of just important to be thinking about and be looking at and be paying attention to. So let's dive into the actual recovery piece. So I think when we're looking at recovery, I think it's important to just mention that we'll talk about some strategies, but this kind of, I guess, the insomnia, oversleeping, insomnia topic kind of leads into this, but like sleep is absolutely the most important piece to recovery, hands down. So if you're not sleeping well, most athletes probably need 7 to 9 hours. Some more, very few need less than that. If you are not sleeping well, and or you're getting up, or you're having something like insomnia, or things are going on with sleep, and you're trying to train hard, you're going to have trouble. Like, you're going to quickly kind of get into that overreaching and kind of overtraining piece. So it's like probably foundational. If you're not doing the sleep, let's just say, don't, nothing that we're going to talk about outside of that is going to help you. You need to get that figured out first of all. So don't think you can get in the ice bath or take some sort of supplement and that's going to just like mask that you didn't sleep, maybe for a day or two, but it's not going to do anything long term. It's not, there's nothing you can do to overcome that lack of sleep. So I'm just going to put that out there. Like, don't fool yourself into thinking that you
Right.
can't sleep and get away with hard training. Anything you want to add? I think we've talked about a few other
I,
things
I
that
think
are
I think
foundational.
having a solid sleep routine is
Mhm.
effective. It's something that I've struggled with. I was notorious for just operating on like 5 to 6 hours of sleep, and I was confused as to why I couldn't perform. And it's just like, hello, moron, you're not sleeping enough. And so what I started to do is I just set timers within my phone to kind of like go into, you know, wind down mode, and it shuts off things other than just like text from like specific numbers that I indicate, to remind me, hey, it's 8:30, it's time to start winding down a little bit. It kind of gives me a buzzer. So it's like, okay, well, I can either finish what it is that I'm doing or whatever I'm watching on TV, and start to prepare myself for bed. Having a prime bedroom environment to sleep in, dark, whether you like it cooler or not. Typically, the science shows that, the cooler the room is, the better quality sleep is going to be. Um, I've also heard that there's only two things that you do in the bedroom, and it's sleeping and having sex, and that's it. So kind of reserving the bedroom for those two things can kind of actually help to improve your quality of sleep. The body doesn't think that, oh, we're going in here and we're going to watch a TV show, so it's time to ramp myself up a little bit. It doesn't confuse the body. So trying to find ways to improve the quality and quantity of your sleep is by far the cheapest and most effective way to increase your performance.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think those are huge points of just that wind down routine is huge, and just addressing, like, why am I not sleeping? Is it because I'm watching something stimulatory right before bed, or did you take caffeine too late? Like, you've got to fix that before you can do any of these other recovery strategies. So, trying to get the sleep, and we can almost have like a whole probably a whole topic on just sleep itself because it's so
Yeah.
important. I think the next one along with that would be the fueling and the eating. And I think what I want to mention here, because I think this is going to be contradictory. I think when people think of recovery, they think protein, which is absolutely, like, we need to be making sure we're getting enough protein, hands down. Yes. If you're under eating protein, that's going to cause issues. But the number one thing we need to be doing is getting enough, in addition to just appropriate energy intake, enough carbohydrate. We need to get carbohydrate,
Yeah.
not only like before and during, but absolutely after a workout. So if you think that you can go and do a hard workout and all you need is a protein drink without carbs, and that's going to be adequate, you are not doing yourself any justice in recovery. And this is with a low carb trend out there and people following this whole low carb thing, and athletes are kind of falling into this. I think a lot of athletes are just shortcoming their recovery adaptation because they're not maximizing. I mean, trying to see what the maximum amount you can kind of get. Obviously it's going to depend if it's an easy workout or a hard workout, but how many carbs can you have at the post-workout recovery window to make sure you're maximizing your glycogen? So this could be anywhere between, I mean, if I had to give you like some rough estimates, like 0.5 to 3 grams per kilogram total, like in that post-recovery period, maybe more, maybe usually not less than 0.5. That might depend on if a recovery run versus a very long run. It's going to vary. So that makes it hard to like pinpoint an exact amount. But what you need to do is just try to do your best to get quite a bit of carbs in that post-workout window, even before protein. Like this is something where there is an important like window of opportunity, because if you do that right away when your body is most sensitive to carbohydrate and glycogen synthesis, then you're maximizing the ability of the most glycogen storage you can. If you wait longer, your ability to store glycogen kind of goes down over time. So finishing your workout and prioritizing carb intake, having the protein too, but let's have some carbs. Let's try to see what we can kind of eat in terms of carbs to see what amount works best. And what that's going to do is it promotes a couple things. It helps, carbs actually help reduce cortisol in a way. So we have a big cortisol spike during a workout. This kind of helps that come down. It also helps synthesize or release insulin, which is usually thought of as a negative thing. But in this case, it's actually a good thing because insulin can help promote recovery. It helps us kind of get into that anabolic response and building phase, building back up recovery, right? So we need the carbs to be able to signal that response. And then the protein kind of comes in along with that, or maybe some carbs first immediately, and then an hour or two later, a meal with carbs and protein, but really prioritizing that. This is not a great time to be like, I'm going to do some intermittent fasting and wait 3 hours to eat. Bad idea. Not a good idea. Unless maybe there's certain circumstances where you do that, but it's usually not a good idea. So fueling is so important. And I think so many people are so afraid of carbs, or they're trying to save their carbs for later. No, eat them right then. That's gonna help you so much in your recovery. So that, I know I'm sounding mean, kind of like or like direct, but that's just what the science says. Don't think that you can get away with that. You're gonna be minimizing your body's ability to recover if you don't do the refueling properly, and even just fueling in general. Like I didn't talk about before and during, but that's because that helps too. But we want to make sure, we're doing it after. I mean, I think I mentioned this the other day. If I have carbs during a long run, I absolutely recover faster, and hands down, I notice it better the next day, better the rest of the day. If I minimize carbs during a long run, I feel it takes me at least 2 days to recover. It's like a noticeable thing. So even the intra workout carbs, if necessary, those need, if you have a duration of intensity of workout that needs that, yes. So that's my big thing.
The way that I kind of look at it is I look at it in terms of like a grocery shelf. So on the shelf, you're going to have proteins, carbs, and fats. And so as you work out, the shelf gets emptied. So it's like you're walking along the shelf and you're like knocking boxes off the shelf, right? The goal is after the workout to go back and refill those shelves as full as it was before you started. The key is that when you fail to refill the shelf, the grocery store is going to move you to a smaller shelf. And that's what the body does. I mean, the body will adjust. It's like, oh, well, we don't need all these stores. And so we're going to not fill them as full. So all that does is it just minimizes the stores that you have available to you for your training session. So, if you go in and you say, I have 100 units of glycogen stores, and your body says, well, you're never refilling back up to 100. We don't think that you need 100, so we're going to knock you down to only 80 units. Now that's your max. That's all you have access to before, you have to start supplementing it during the session. So I don't know if you would agree with it, but it seemed like a reasonable analogy to use to try and think about what it's like, what I'm doing to my body during training sessions, and how important it is post session to refill those shelves again.
Right. Yeah. It's like we have like a certain amount of like cubby holes. I kind of think of it like that.
Yeah.
And you want to you deplete those and then you want to refill them. But unfortunately, if you wait 5 hours after the run, you can't refill them to the complete amount that maybe you're capable, like that are, just because the body doesn't have, I mean, maybe maybe if you take enough recovery days, you can eventually kind of fill those up. But if you're trying to do another hard workout tomorrow or the very next day or within a couple days, like if you don't have those filled up, then you're going to deplete again. And then, if you keep doing that process, all of a sudden your glycogen is starting to deplete. And that is a stressful on the body, but also like once our glycogen levels are at a certain point too low, like our body is just not going to let us train. So you're going to go out for a run and feel like crap and you're not going to be able to do it. So making sure you recover, because that's going to, not let you be able to train like you want and be able to get out there the next day or the day after and train like you want. I think the other one is like the hydration piece, is just making sure you're staying hydrated. I think we kind of forget how much, I know this is my one thing I'm chronically working on, is just hydrating, because I'm not always good about it. But it is stressful in the body to be dehydrated, and it can have performance detriment. So I think it goes without saying, maybe most people kind of know that intuitively, we got to be hydrated, but making sure that we are hydrating adequately. I know, Justin, I have just like maybe 5 more minutes before I have to hop off. So what I'm wondering.
Yeah, we're gonna jump in. I'm just gonna talk briefly about some of these other little shorter.
Do you want to just almost do like talk quickly about them, or just dive?
Yeah, I'm just gonna mention them. So I'm not going into too much detail. I get carried away sometimes talking about training. So
it's okay.
Assuming that you have a properly structured training plan. That's what we're going to assume already, that you've sequenced your workouts appropriate, and you've adequately evaluated your current fitness level. All of that assumed. Here are some things that you can do to aid recovery. I would argue that active recovery is going to be vastly better than taking days off. And the reason is because what happens is that when let's say that you do a hard session and you're going to go and just do a nice easy walk, or you're just going to get on, like if you're a runner and you're just going to get on the elliptical, that non-impact, what that's doing is it's actually pushing the fluid out of the muscle, right? And that's what's causing the swelling and the nerve pain and the soreness, is that swelling of the muscle, and it pushes on the nerve cells like we've talked about before. And so this active recovery is actually helping the body move that fluid. And so I argue that active recovery is a better way to aid recovery and to alleviate soreness. The second one is going to be kind of like manual manipulation, whether that is massage, whether that's rolling, whether that's compressive therapies, percussive therapies, where we're talking about like, Theraguns and Normatec boots, or just like compression socks and things like that. Those things will help manage the swelling in the fluids that's in your body and aid blood flow. Even hydrotherapy, like warm, like hot tub and sauna kind of therapies. I caution you in using cold therapies, and I use cold therapies. I use cold plunge tubs, but there's a very specific reason on why I implement those. A is you don't want to particularly do them right after a session. If you do that, you're going to sacrifice some adaptation. Now, if you're willing to accept that opportunity cost, then that's fine. I do that sometimes. Like if I go and I have like a pretty hard run and my feet are just like really hurting, I'm like, look, I'm willing to accept the little loss of adaptation, by just getting in the tub and alleviating some of this pain. So I'll just stick my feet and my calves in there and it's fine. the science shows is that we want to wait about 4 hours post session, and that's where the benefits of cold plunge therapy is maximized. You don't want to do it, you know. I caution using it before because it's blood restricting, right? So it restricts blood flow, and what you want warm, pliable muscles during an activity. So that's not really what you want. And doing it post session, there's too much of an adaptive loss. But again, it depends on your willingness to accept that
I think with
loss.
the
Yeah.
cold therapy, sometimes I use that not after a hard day, but after like a recovery day, kind of like that
Mhm.
time. Because I'm not doing, there's not much adaptation happening in that easy recovery day, but that feeling of using the cold can help me reduce pain and feel better. So sometimes that's how I use cold. So it's not every day, and sometimes not every week, but sometimes I do use it in that sense to kind of aid recovery on a recovery day specifically. So just a thought there.
And it's not a substitute for a poor training plan. So it's
Yeah.
not like you can say I can just stack on intensity because I went ahead. I bought these compressive boots. You know, I don't have a connection with the company, and I'm not sponsored by them, but I do have a Normatec system that I use a lot. I'll go for my long rides, and then I come home and I set up my computer and I do work on training plans, and I sit in my boots, and all it's doing is it's managing the inflammatory response into the muscle and pushing fluids out and helping my body kind of filter the waste that has accumulated from the activity in order to be prepared for tomorrow. It is not a reason to say I'm going to go out and I'm going to do threshold intervals today, and I'm going to do some hard big gear sessions tomorrow because I have the system that's going to prepare me.
Mhm.
It will reduce the recovery time. I don't have any science behind, how many days it improves by, but I know that after I get out of the system, I do feel a little better and I do feel better prepared for the next day, but it does not get me back to 100%. And it's not a substitute for stuff like rolling and, manual manipulation. So if you have the opportunity for massage, and we're talking like if you have the opportunity for a clinical massage and not just kind of like the massage, in the strip mall that's down the street, where you know may not be as high quality or may not be as trained, then I opt for the clinical side of the massage. They're going to be a lot more effective in terms of getting you prepared and working out some of the kinks that's developed. Because no matter what you do, you're going to build muscle knot. You're going to build knots in the muscle. You're going to have, fluid that just does not want to leave. And so there's stuff that's going to happen. And no matter how effective your recovery plan is, sometimes you need outside help. And so
Mhm.
I highly recommend and encourage, and I use that stuff myself. Even though I have a Normatec system, I've started implementing, clinical massages into my training plans to try and help some of the chronic issues that I've developed over the years. And I know it's helpful, and it's one piece of the recovery puzzle that I'm trying to put together, but it's not all of it.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I do use, like, I have a Theragun that I use, but it's, like, maybe 10 minutes of Theragun after in the evening before bed, kind of just to help, maybe blood flow and
yep.
loosen up the muscles a little bit, and it helps, but it's by no means something I wouldn't spend 3 hours doing. That may be overkill, or, it's just a little bit of that helps, but it's not like I'm doing that thinking, "Okay, that's gonna make up for not eating or sleeping correctly." The other one thing, because I do have to run, I wanted to mention here, just because it's something, you mentioned that podcast, something that I'm really starting to want to implement is like making sure that throughout the day we have those opportunities for relaxation, because that's when recovery happens, is when we're in that sort of parasympathetic state. So we have kind of the sympathetic state, which is happening when we're stressed or exercising. We want to sort of allow those opportunities to kind of calm down. So anytime you can do throughout your day, just time you can take when you're busy to just calm your nervous system is going to be great for recovery. And one time that you can do this is after especially a harder training session, when you have a lot of that parasympathetic activity and sort of higher cortisol, is taking a few minutes after the workout, like 5 minutes. And I know this is hard for me because sometimes I'm like done with my workout, I gotta work, I've got like 10 minutes literally between like my hard workout and having to go to my job, like do, see clients or whatever. So it's hard. But something I'm really trying to do, if I can, is take about 5 minutes of like box breathing, deep breathing, listening to something calm, just walking down. Like it's instead of just like stopping my workout and getting in my car or getting inside and going right to the next thing, maybe allowing like 5 minutes of like walking, slowly kind of like ramping down a little bit, allowing a little bit of time to sort of like, okay, I'm going to like allow myself to calm down after a workout. And there is a little bit of research in this, but doing that can actually help start to promote that recovery process. So it kind of like gets you into that recovery mode. So that's one thing I would also highlight. It's just a small little thing that people can do to sort of, maybe start to cause that recovery piece. I know I have to run. There are some nutrition things, like some supplements I want to talk about. What I might do is I was kind of wanting to create a blog article from this. It was just more of also kind of more of the nutrition piece of this, of recovery. So what I might do is just create a little bit more for people to kind of go and look at my blog, or we could always just dive in and do like a short recording or something with some of those. Of course, what I want to mention is that no amount of supplementation will ever overcome not eating enough. So this is all of these strategies again are after you've already like got those basics down: sleep, eating, hydration, and then you're adding the recovery strategies on there. So again, with any sort of thing you see, any supplement you see out there, there's no supplement that's gonna really make a difference if you're not doing those basics first. So I can kind of follow up with something on some of the different supplements available. I don't know if you have any other thoughts, Justin. I do have to run.
Honestly, I think that topic warrants its own podcast.
Yeah, maybe we could. Maybe that's what we could dive into next. Is like, do you want to just
fueling for recovery?
Yeah.
A nutritional deep dive into ways to aid in recovery.
Since we're on this topic, maybe we could even just do that next. I mean, it maybe won't warrant like a whole hour, but I think it maybe will. But let's maybe sort of lead into that and have that be what we talk about next. Because I do think there's a whole piece there. I mean, I mentioned some of it, but I do think there's a lot of considerations, even with protein, for instance. Like I mentioned, carbs are important, but how do we eat protein in a way that helps with recovery? What are some of the supplements? So yeah, let's maybe talk about that. And,
I honestly think that this is such a huge topic, and it's almost equivalent to a series. We could easily develop a series on recovery. So the amount of time that we've spent talking to you guys is it's an hour and 23 minutes so far. I think that we've gone a little bit long, but I think that we've only scratched the surface. Essentially, we've introduced a couple interesting ideas and some interesting topics, but by no means have we given like an exhaustive look at some of these aspects of recovery. And if you're into triathlon, there's 3 disciplines of triathlon. The 4th discipline is nutrition. I would say the 5th discipline is recovery. Because without the recovery, there is no training. So it doesn't matter how hard and how willing you are to train. If you can't recover, you're not going to perform. So I know that Katie's got to go. Yep. And so I want to thank you guys for listening in episode 3 of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, our look and our introduction into recovery. We will see you again next time. And again, thank you for sharing your time with us. And we look forward to you coming back.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Talk to you later, Katie.
Bye. Yeah.
I'm going to hit it. Listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Subscribe to the podcast on